The room smells of dust and ink and cold stone. The windows are narrow. The light falls in hard angles across the table where the maps are spread. Outside, the North African sun has already begun to bake the ground, but inside this commandeered villa turned tactical headquarters, the air remains cool, almost damp. Erwin Rommel stands with his hands flat on the table, leaning forward, studying the disposition of forces across a theater that stretches from the Mediterranean coast to the interior wastes. His eyes move from symbol to symbol, tracing supply lines, identifying choke points, calculating time and distance with the precision of a man who has spent years turning geography into advantage. Everything on this map makes sense. Everything follows doctrine. Everything obeys the rules. And that is exactly what troubles him. He straightens, reaches for a report that arrived an hour ago, scans it again even though he has already memorized the key details. The Allied forces are moving, yes, but not in the pattern he expected. Not in the pattern anyone trained in modern warfare would expect. They are attacking along a front that should collapse under its own logistical weight. They are sustaining an advance through terrain that doctrine says will slow them to a crawl. They are coordinating operations across distances that should make unified command impossible. And yet the reports keep coming, each one confirming what the previous one suggested. They are not slowing down. They are not making the mistakes they should be making. They are not following the rules, except when it suits them, and when they break the rules, they do so with such consistency that it begins to look like a different set of rules entirely. Rommel sets the report down. He looks at the map again. He tries to see what he is missing. Because there must be something. There is always something. No army moves this way by accident. No commander sustains pressure across multiple axes without making a critical error somewhere. But the error is not appearing. The gap is not opening. The overextension that should be inevitable is not happening. And the longer he stares at the map, the more he realizes that he is not looking at chaos. He is looking at design. Deliberate, methodical, relentless design. And it is working. He turns away from the table and walks to the window. The sun is higher now. The shadows are shorter. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills and the wadis and the scattered patches of scrub, the Allied armies are moving. Not rushing. Not hesitating. Just moving. And behind them, invisible but undeniable, is the hand of Dwight Eisenhower, a man Rommel has never met, a man whose name appears on every intelligence summary but whose face remains abstract, a man who is winning not because he is brilliant, but because he has made brilliance irrelevant. Because he has built a machine that does not need to be brilliant. It only needs to be relentless. Rommel knows what comes next. He has seen this before, in different theaters, under different circumstances. He has watched armies collapse not because they were defeated in a single battle, but because they were ground down, worn out, forced to react until reaction became the only strategy they had left. And now he is on the other side of that equation. Now he is the one reacting. Now he is the one watching the map change faster than he can update it. And the worst part, the part that makes his jaw tighten and his hands clench, is that everything the Allies are doing should fail. Every textbook he has ever read says it should fail. Every lesson he has ever learned says it should fail. But it is not failing. And by the time this narrative reaches its conclusion, there will come a moment, a single crystalline moment, when Rommel will understand why. When he will see, with absolute clarity, that the enemy has not won by breaking the rules. They have won by making the rules stop mattering. But that moment is not yet. Right now, there is only the map, the reports, the growing sense that something fundamental has shifted, and the cold realization that he is already too late to stop it. The first indication that doctrine is bending arrives 3 days earlier, wrapped in the language of routine intelligence. A forward reconnaissance unit reports movement near a supply depot that should be empty. The report is flagged, passed up the chain, cross-referenced with other sources. Rommel reads it in the late afternoon, after a day spent repositioning units to counter what he believes is a feint toward the coast. The movement near the depot does not fit the pattern. It does not align with any of the 3 likely Allied strategies his staff has wargamed. It is not a feint, and it is not a main thrust. It is something else. Something smaller. Something that should not matter. He makes a note. He files it. He moves on. Because there are 100 other pieces of information competing for his attention, and this one, isolated and unexplained, does not yet rise to the level of urgency. But it stays with him. A small itch at the back of his mind. A question without an answer. And when the next report arrives, 12 hours later, describing Allied armor moving through a sector that every map designates as impassable, the itch becomes a burn. He calls his chief of staff into the room. They stand over the map together. Rommel points to the sector in question. He asks how this is possible. The chief of staff hesitates, then suggests that perhaps the maps are outdated, or perhaps the Allies have engineers moving faster than expected. Rommel does not respond immediately. He knows the maps are not outdated. He knows the terrain. He has walked it himself. And yet the report is clear. The armor is there. It is moving. And it is not alone. Behind it, supply trucks. Behind them, infantry. Behind them, more armor. A column. A coordinated column. Moving through ground that should require days of preparation. Rommel asks how long it would take to reposition forces to block this movement. The chief of staff calculates. He names a number. Rommel looks at the map again, measures the distance the Allies have already covered, projects their rate of advance, and realizes that by the time his forces arrive, the Allies will have moved past the blocking position. They will be somewhere else. Somewhere he cannot yet predict. Because they are not moving according to any plan he recognizes. They are moving according to something else. Something adaptive. Something that responds to the terrain, to the resistance, to the opportunities that appear in real time. He dismisses his chief of staff. He returns to the window. He watches the light change as the sun begins its descent. And he thinks about Dwight Eisenhower. He thinks about a man who has never commanded troops in combat before this war. A man who rose through staff positions and logistics roles. A man who, by all conventional measures, should not be in command of the largest Allied operation in history. And yet here he is. And here Rommel is, watching the consequences unfold across a theater that is slipping out of his control one sector at a time. The second indication arrives not as a report, but as a pattern. Over the next 48 hours, Rommel receives updates from 6 different sectors. In each one, the Allies are doing something that should not work. In one, they are maintaining supply lines across distances that doctrine says will create critical shortages. In another, they are coordinating air support with ground movements so precisely that German units cannot maneuver without being spotted and hit. In a third, they are using naval gunfire to support operations so far inland that the shells should be falling short, but they are not falling short. They are landing exactly where they need to land. And in every sector, the tempo is the same. Steady. Unrelenting. Not fast enough to create chaos, but fast enough that Rommel cannot consolidate a defense before the next wave arrives. He gathers his senior officers. They sit around the table where the maps are spread. He walks them through each sector, each anomaly, each violation of established doctrine. He asks for explanations. They offer theories. Overconfidence. Recklessness. Desperation. Luck. Rommel listens. He nods. He does not argue. But he also does not believe them. Because what he is seeing is not luck. Luck is random. Luck does not repeat itself 6 times across 6 different sectors. What he is seeing is design. And the design is working because it is not trying to follow the rules. It is not trying to be doctrinally sound. It is trying to win. And in that difference, Rommel begins to see the shape of something larger. Something that will, in the days to come, force him to confront a truth he has spent his entire career avoiding. The meetings end. The officers disperse. Rommel remains at the table. He pulls a fresh map, marks the current positions, draws lines projecting where the Allies will be tomorrow, the day after that. The lines converge on positions he cannot defend. They bypass strongpoints he has spent weeks fortifying. They exploit gaps he did not know existed. And the more he studies the map, the more he realizes that the Allies are not reacting to him. He is reacting to them. They are setting the tempo. They are choosing the ground. They are deciding when and where the next engagement will happen. And all he can do is respond. All he can do is shift forces, redraw lines, issue orders that are obsolete before they are received. He folds the map. He leaves the room. He walks through the villa's empty corridors, past rooms filled with radios and clerks and men bent over desks translating tactical reality into the dry language of reports. He steps outside. The night is cold. The stars are sharp. Somewhere in the distance, he hears the low rumble of artillery. Not close. Not immediate. But constant. A reminder that the war is not pausing while he tries to make sense of it. The war is continuing. The Allies are continuing. And they are winning. The breakthrough that should not happen happens on a Tuesday. Rommel is reviewing supply manifests when the first call comes through. An Allied force has penetrated a defensive line that was supposed to hold for a week. The line was manned by experienced units. It was supported by artillery and armor. It had clear fields of fire and prepared positions. And it collapsed in 6 hours. Not because the Allies brought overwhelming force. Not because the defenders broke and ran. But because the Allies found a seam, exploited it with precision, and once through, did not stop. They pushed deeper, faster, farther than any prudent commander would push. They ignored their flanks. They ignored their supply lines. They ignored every rule that says you consolidate before you advance. And it worked. Because by the time Rommel organized a counterattack, the Allies had moved past the point where a counterattack would matter. They were already somewhere else. He listens to the reports. He asks questions. He receives answers that do not help. The officers on the line are confused. They followed procedure. They did everything correctly. And they still lost. Rommel thanks them. He ends the call. He sits in silence for a long moment. And then he does something he has not done in years. He pulls out a notebook, the kind he used as a young officer, and he starts writing. Not orders. Not plans. Just observations. Facts without interpretation. And the first fact he writes is this: the enemy is winning because they are not trying to be right. They are trying to be effective. And effectiveness, he is beginning to understand, does not always look like doctrine. The days blur together. Reports arrive in waves. The Allies take a port that should have been defended for months. They establish an airfield on ground that should have been too soft. They move a division across a river at night without losing a single vehicle. Each event, taken alone, could be explained. Could be written off as fortune or error or exceptional leadership at the tactical level. But taken together, they form a picture. And the picture is of an enemy that has stopped asking what the rules say and started asking what will work. And that shift, small as it sounds, changes everything. Rommel meets with his staff again. This time, he does not ask for explanations. He asks for proposals. What can be done? Where forces can be concentrated? Which positions can be held? The discussion lasts hours. Maps are marked and remarked. Units are shuffled on paper. Timelines are drawn. And at the end of it all, Rommel looks at the final plan and sees that it is defensive. Entirely defensive. There is no counteroffensive. No attempt to seize initiative. No effort to impose his will on the enemy. Just a series of fallback positions, delaying actions, and rearguard operations. It is a plan designed to slow defeat, not to achieve victory. And everyone in the room knows it. He approves the plan. He signs the orders. He watches as they are carried out by runners and radios and dispatch riders who will ride through the night to deliver them. And when the room is empty again, he sits down and stares at the map one more time. He traces the line of Allied advance. He sees where it will go. He sees what it will mean. And he understands, with a clarity that is almost physical, that he has been outmaneuvered. Not by a genius. Not by a master tactician who saw the battlefield better than he did. But by a man who built a system. A system that did not rely on genius. A system that could absorb mistakes, adapt to failures, and keep moving forward no matter what. A system that made individual brilliance unnecessary. And in making it unnecessary, made it unstoppable. The moment arrives on a Thursday morning. Rommel is alone in the room where he has spent so many hours studying maps. The latest intelligence summary is in front of him. It details an operation that should have failed. The Allies attacked a fortified position with insufficient force. They did not have air superiority. They did not have artillery superiority. By every measure, they should have been repulsed. But they were not repulsed. Because they did not try to win by overwhelming the position. They tried to win by making the position irrelevant. They bypassed it. They isolated it. They left it intact and moved on. And the garrison, sitting in their fortifications, realized too late that they had not been defeated. They had been ignored. And being ignored was worse. Rommel reads the summary 3 times. He sets it down. He looks at the map. And he sees, finally, what Eisenhower has been doing all along. He has not been trying to destroy the German army. He has been trying to make the German army irrelevant. He has been fighting a war where the goal is not to win battles, but to make battles unnecessary. Where the objective is not to seize ground, but to make the enemy's ground meaningless. Where victory comes not from breaking the enemy's will, but from making the enemy's will irrelevant. This breaks every rule. Not because it is reckless or chaotic or improvised, but because it is designed. Carefully, methodically, ruthlessly designed. It is a way of war that does not care about doctrine. It does not care about historical precedent. It does not care about what should work. It only cares about what does work. And what works, Rommel can now see, is relentlessness. Is adaptability. Is the willingness to take risks that no manual would approve, but that succeed because the enemy is still playing by the manual. He walks to the window. The sun is high. The day is bright. Out there, beyond his sight, the Allied armies are moving. They will continue moving tomorrow. They will continue the day after. They will continue until they reach their objectives, or until they are stopped by something more powerful than doctrine, more flexible than experience, more ruthless than tradition. And Rommel knows, standing there in the cold stone room with the maps spread behind him and the sunlight streaming through the narrow windows, that he does not have that thing. He has skill. He has experience. He has courage. But he does not have the one thing that matters now. He does not have a system that can match theirs. The realization is not dramatic. There is no moment of despair, no collapse of will. It is simply a fact, accepted the way a doctor accepts a diagnosis. The enemy is winning. They will continue winning. And there is nothing he can do to stop it. Not because he lacks talent. Not because his forces lack courage. But because the nature of the contest has changed. The rules that governed warfare for centuries have not been broken. They have been made obsolete. And Eisenhower, the man who never commanded combat troops before this war, the man who rose through staff positions and logistics, has become the architect of that obsolescence. Rommel turns from the window. He walks back to the table. He picks up a pencil and draws a single line across the map, marking the limit of how far his forces can retreat before they have nowhere left to go. The line is shorter than he would like. It is shorter than he expected when this campaign began. But it is realistic. And realism, he has learned over these past days and weeks, is all he has left. The days that follow are a study in managed retreat. Orders go out. Units pull back. Rear guards are established and abandoned. Supply depots are evacuated or destroyed. The Allies follow, never rushing, never hesitating, maintaining that same steady pressure that has defined their advance from the beginning. Rommel coordinates the withdrawal with the precision he once used to coordinate attacks. But coordination is not enough. Precision is not enough. Because the Allies are not trying to trap him. They are not trying to encircle him. They are simply trying to push him back until there is nowhere left to go. And it is working. He meets with his officers less frequently now. There is less to discuss. The plans write themselves. Retreat here. Hold there. Buy time. Conserve forces. Prepare the next line. The conversations are brief, professional, devoid of the optimism that once characterized them. Everyone knows what is happening. Everyone knows how this ends. And yet the work continues. Because that is what soldiers do. They follow orders. They execute plans. They do their duty even when duty has become synonymous with delay. Rommel spends more time alone. He reads reports. He studies maps. He writes letters that will never be sent. And he thinks about Eisenhower. He thinks about a man he will never meet, a man whose face he has seen only in grainy photographs, a man who is winning a war by refusing to fight it the way wars have always been fought. And he wonders if Eisenhower knows what he has done. If he understands that he has not just won a campaign, but changed the nature of war itself. If he realizes that future generations will study this moment not as a tactical victory, but as a conceptual revolution. But these are questions without answers. And Rommel is too practical to dwell on them for long. There is work to do. There are forces to move. There are decisions to make. And so he returns to the map, to the reports, to the endless cycle of react and adjust and retreat. He does what he has always done. He fights. But he fights now with the knowledge that fighting is not enough. That skill is not enough. That even genius is not enough when the enemy has built something larger than genius. Something systemic. Something unstoppable. The final lines are drawn on a map that has been redrawn so many times the paper is beginning to tear. Rommel marks the positions where his forces will make their stand. Not a permanent stand. Not a decisive stand. Just a stand. A place to delay. A place to exact a cost. A place to prove that even in defeat, there is still professionalism, still discipline, still duty. He signs the orders. He sends them out. And then he sits back and waits for the reports to come in. They arrive in the evening. The Allies have made contact. They are probing the defenses. They are not attacking in force. Not yet. They are testing. Measuring. Finding the weak points. And once they find them, Rommel knows, they will exploit them with the same methodical efficiency they have shown throughout this campaign. They will not rush. They will not take unnecessary risks. They will simply apply pressure until something gives. And then they will move forward. And the cycle will repeat. He leaves the headquarters as the sun sets. He walks through the camp, past soldiers preparing positions, checking weapons, writing letters home. They look up as he passes. Some nod. Some salute. None speak. There is nothing to say. They all know what is coming. They all know what it means. But they are still here. Still working. Still soldiers. And Rommel feels a surge of pride so strong it almost overwhelms the frustration and anger and helplessness that have defined these past weeks. These men deserve better. They deserve a commander who can give them victory. But victory is no longer his to give. All he can give them is time. And even that is running out. He returns to his quarters. He sits at a small desk. He pulls out a blank sheet of paper. And he writes. Not a report. Not an order. Just a reflection. A private accounting of what he has learned. He writes about doctrine and its limits. He writes about adaptability and its power. He writes about Eisenhower and the system he has built. And he writes, in the final paragraph, a single sentence that captures everything he has come to understand over these long, grinding weeks. The sentence is simple. The sentence is devastating. The sentence is this. The enemy won not by breaking the rules, but by making the rules irrelevant. He reads the sentence. He folds the paper. He places it in a drawer where it will remain, unread by anyone else, a private monument to a lesson learned too late. And then he walks back to the map room, and prepares for the next day. Because the next day is coming. The Allies are coming. And there is still work to do. The campaign does not end with a single battle. It ends with a series of withdrawals, each one bringing the German forces closer to the point of collapse. Rommel oversees each withdrawal with the same care he once brought to offensives. But care is not enough. Skill is not enough. The Allies keep coming. And eventually, the line that Rommel drew on the map, the line that marked the limit of how far he could retreat, is crossed. And then there is nowhere left to go. The final message arrives on a morning that feels no different from any other. The Allies have broken through. The positions are collapsing. The retreat has become a rout. Rommel reads the message. He sets it down. He walks to the window one last time. The sun is bright. The day is clear. And somewhere out there, beyond the hills and the dust and the chaos, Dwight Eisenhower is winning. Not because he was smarter. Not because he was bolder. But because he built a system that did not need him to be either. A system that could win even when he was not brilliant. Even when he made mistakes. Even when the enemy did everything right. Rommel turns from the window. He gathers his papers. He issues the final orders. And he prepares to leave. Not in defeat, though that is what history will call it. But in understanding. In the hard, cold understanding that he has been present at the birth of something new. A new way of war. A way that makes the old ways obsolete. A way that will define conflicts for generations to come. And as he walks out of the villa that has been his headquarters, past the maps and the radios and the men still bent over desks, he carries with him a truth that will haunt him for the rest of his life. The truth that he was beaten not by a better general, but by a better idea. And that no amount of skill or courage or experience could have changed that. The significance of what happened here, in this theater, in this campaign, extends far beyond the tactical details. It represents a fundamental shift in how wars are conceived and executed. For centuries, military doctrine emphasized the importance of decisive battles, brilliant maneuvers, and the genius of individual commanders. Rommel himself was a product of that tradition. He built his reputation on audacious attacks, on reading terrain better than his opponents, on making decisions faster and bolder than anyone else. And for a time, that approach worked. But Eisenhower showed that there was another way. A way that did not rely on individual brilliance. A way that emphasized systems over genius, logistics over tactics, sustained pressure over decisive engagement. This was not a rejection of military science. It was an evolution of it. Eisenhower understood that modern warfare, with its vast distances and massive armies and complex supply chains, could not be won by a single brilliant commander making a single brilliant decision. It had to be won by an organization. By a system that could coordinate air and ground and naval forces across multiple theaters. By a command structure that could delegate authority without losing coherence. By a logistical network that could sustain operations over time and distance. And most importantly, by a philosophy that valued effectiveness over elegance, that measured success not by how brilliant a victory looked, but by whether it brought the war closer to its conclusion. Rommel, standing in that cold stone room, staring at maps that could not keep pace with reality, was witnessing the obsolescence of his own expertise. He was not being defeated by a lack of skill. He was being defeated by the emergence of a new paradigm. And the tragedy, the deep professional tragedy, is that he understood this. He saw it happening. He recognized the shape of it. But he could not stop it. Because stopping it would have required him to abandon everything he knew, everything he had learned, everything that had made him successful. It would have required him to become someone else. And that was asking too much. The broader lesson here is not about Rommel or Eisenhower as individuals. It is about the nature of change. About what happens when the rules that govern success suddenly stop applying. About the danger of expertise when expertise becomes rigidity. About the power of systems that can adapt faster than individuals can learn. And about the cruel reality that sometimes, doing everything right is not enough. Because the contest is no longer about doing things right. It is about doing things that work. And those are not always the same thing. This breaks every rule. Not because the rules were wrong when they were written. Not because the men who followed them were foolish. But because the world changed. Because technology changed. Because scale changed. Because the nature of conflict itself changed. And when that happens, when the fundamental assumptions underlying a system of thought are undermined, All the skill and experience and dedication in the world cannot save you. You can only adapt. Or you can only lose. Rommel adapted as best he could. He adjusted tactics. He changed approaches. He tried to respond to what he was seeing. But he was adapting within a framework that was itself obsolete. He was trying to solve a problem using tools that were designed for a different kind of problem. And so he lost. Not because he was incompetent. Not because he lacked courage or intelligence or determination. But because the ground beneath him had shifted, and he did not shift fast enough. Eisenhower, by contrast, did not need to be brilliant. He needed to be clear. Clear about objectives. Clear about organization. Clear about priorities. He built a system that could function without him. A system that could take a hit and keep going. A system that did not collapse when mistakes were made, because the system was designed to absorb mistakes. And in building that system, he created something that Rommel could not match. Not a better army. A better way of using armies. The irony is that Rommel would have understood this if he had been on the other side. If he had been building the system instead of fighting against it. He was not rigid by nature. He was adaptive, creative, willing to take risks. But he was adaptive within limits. He was creative within boundaries. He was willing to take risks that doctrine could accommodate. And when he faced an enemy that operated outside those boundaries, outside those limits, he had no answer. Because the answer would have required him to stop being Erwin Rommel and become something else entirely. This is the tragedy at the heart of this story. Not that Rommel lost. But that he lost while doing everything a brilliant commander should do. He read the terrain. He anticipated movements. He positioned forces. He made bold decisions. He inspired his troops. He fought with skill and courage and determination. And none of it mattered. Because the contest was no longer about those things. It was about something else. Something systemic. Something larger than any individual. And individuals, no matter how talented, cannot defeat systems. Not alone. Not without building a system of their own. The cold open promised a moment of recognition. A moment when Rommel would understand what was happening. That moment came not in a single flash of insight, but in a slow, accumulating realization spread over days and weeks. It came in the reports that did not make sense. In the maps that became obsolete before they could be acted on. In the orders that arrived too late. In the retreats that could not be stopped. And finally, in that sentence written on a piece of paper and folded away in a drawer. The enemy won not by breaking the rules, but by making the rules irrelevant. That sentence is the key to everything. Because it captures the essential truth of what happened. Eisenhower did not win by being reckless. He did not win by ignoring doctrine. He won by creating a new doctrine. One that his enemy did not recognize until it was too late. One that rendered the old doctrine obsolete not by disproving it, but by making it inapplicable. And in doing so, he changed war itself. He showed that the future belonged not to the brilliant individual, but to the well-designed system. Not to the bold gamble, but to the sustained campaign. Not to the decisive battle, but to the relentless advance. Rommel saw this. He understood it. And he could do nothing to stop it. That is the heart of this story. That is the moment the narrative has been building toward. The moment when a great commander realizes that greatness is not enough. That skill is not enough. That even doing everything right is not enough when the rules have changed and you are still playing by the old ones. And so we return to the question that has driven this narrative from the beginning. How does a commander react when everything he knows stops working? When every principle he has relied on stops applying? When the enemy wins not by being better at the game, but by changing the game itself? The answer, as Rommel discovered, is that you cannot react. You can only watch. You can only understand. You can only accept. Because by the time you realize what has happened, it is already too late to change the outcome. All you can do is learn the lesson. And hope that someone, somewhere, takes it to heart before they face the same situation. This breaks every rule. But it breaks them in a way that makes you question whether the rules were ever as solid as you thought. Whether the principles you relied on were ever as universal as they seemed. Whether the expertise you built your career on was ever as durable as you believed. And those are uncomfortable questions. Questions that challenge identity, that undermine confidence, that force a reckoning with the limits of knowledge. But they are also necessary questions. Because the world does not stop changing just because you have mastered it. The rules do not stop evolving just because you have learned them. And the enemy does not stop adapting just because you have figured them out. Rommel learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. By living it. By experiencing it. By standing in a cold stone room and watching his carefully constructed understanding of warfare crumble under the weight of a new reality. And in learning that lesson, he became a symbol. Not of failure, but of the limits of excellence. Of what happens when the world changes faster than even the most talented can adapt. Of the danger of expertise that cannot imagine its own obsolescence. Eisenhower, for his part, became the symbol of something else. Of systems thinking. Of organizational excellence. Of the power of coordination over individual brilliance. He was not a great tactician. He was not a bold risk-taker. He was a manager. An organizer. A coordinator. And in a war that required those skills more than it required tactical genius, he was exactly what was needed. He built the machine. He set it in motion. And then he let it work. And it worked. Not perfectly. Not without mistakes. But well enough. Consistently enough. Relentlessly enough. And in the end, that was all that mattered. So the question remains. Did Eisenhower win because he respected the rules while Rommel stayed trapped by them? Or did Eisenhower win because he understood that rules are tools, not laws? That they serve a purpose, but only as long as the conditions that created them still apply? That when conditions change, the rules must change with them? And that the commander who can change the rules faster than the enemy can adapt to the change will always have the advantage? These are not easy questions. They do not have simple answers. But they are worth thinking about. Worth discussing. Worth debating. Because they go to the heart of what it means to be competent in a changing world. What it means to be an expert when expertise can become obsolete. What it means to be successful when the definition of success is constantly shifting. If you found this story compelling, if it made you think about war and strategy and adaptation in a new way, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Do you think Eisenhower won because he respected the rules, or because he knew when to change them? Do you think Rommel was trapped by doctrine, or simply facing an enemy that had evolved past it? And what does this story teach us about the nature of expertise, the limits of excellence, and the power of systems over individuals? These are questions worth exploring. Questions that extend far beyond this one campaign, this one theater, this one moment in history. If this narrative resonated with you, if it held your attention for these 9,000 words, consider leaving a like on the video. It helps the algorithm understand that long-form, detailed, psychologically complex historical storytelling has an audience. That there are people who want more than surface-level summaries and clickbait titles. That there is a hunger for stories that take their time, that build tension carefully, that reward patience with insight. And if you want more stories like this, more untold moments from World War II told through the lens of psychological realism and narrative depth, subscribe to the channel. Because there are hundreds of these moments. Hundreds of instances where the rules broke down, where expertise failed, where the world changed faster than anyone could keep up. And each one is worth exploring. Each one has lessons. Each one reveals something about human nature, about conflict, about the eternal tension between the world as it is and the world as we think it should be. This is the story of Erwin Rommel watching Dwight Eisenhower win anyway. Watching the rules stop mattering. Watching a new kind of war emerge from the ruins of the old. And realizing, too late to change the outcome, that he was present at the birth of something that would define warfare for generations to come. It is a story about excellence and its limits. About systems and their power. About the danger of expertise that cannot imagine its own obsolescence. And about the cold, hard truth that sometimes, doing everything right is still not enough. Because the game has changed. And no one told you.